One of the biggest issues for wildlife filmmaking and photography for me is the size of the kit. You know, you end up taking the kitchen sink sometimes. With big lenses, then you need big tripods, big tripod heads, big matte boxes and filters to go on the end of your glass. Chuck in aerial shots, and now you've got to take a big drone around you. Audio, sound equipment, you know, it soon escalates pretty quick. And ever since using the new Sony FX-30, Sony's new cinema line camera, I thought, oh, I wonder how small I could make a kit and make a really nice, compact, lightweight travel kit that I could fly around with without losing, you know, the reach that I'm normally used to working with, and also the quality. Now, the brains of the operation is the new Sony Cineline camera, the FX-30, and then I am using the 70-200 GM Mark II, one of my all-time favorite lenses. I wish I could use it more. And then I've been putting the 2x converter on it. So this lens will then turn into a 140mm to 400mm full frame lens. That means when you put the Sony FX-30 on it, you're getting an additional 1.5x crop. So that means you're getting what, a 280mm at the wide end, and then all the way to 600mm on the long end, and it gives you a 5.6 aperture throughout that range, which is a really nice working range and a great f-stop as well, because that's even quicker than my Sony 200-600. Converting lenses, putting teleconverters on is risky business when it comes to autofocus, and also you've got to have a fast enough lens that when you add those f-stops, you're not going to lose completely all light to work with. Being so light and compact, I thought I can make it a little bit lighter when it comes to my sticks and my tripod head. And I'm running Gitzo on both. Now this is a Gitzo Travel Series head, and I'm using a Gitzo two-way fluid head video head system, and I've been testing it out on a recent trip. I went back to the UK for Christmas to see my family. They live in the Isle of Wight, so I was spending a little bit of time out filming in the Isle of Wight, and we spent a few days in the New Forest in Hampshire as well. I've also put the new wireless Sony ECMB1, whatever it's called, this lovely little thing. Now, I don't find it's the best quality audio when I capture it, but I was going with that light, compact setup, and being wireless is another nice touch to keep things light and minimalistic. Now, there are pros and cons, of course, with all setups, and this one is no different, and there are a few cons with it. One of them is not being able to level your tripod head easily. You know, being a thread top tripod plate and tripod head, you haven't got that bowl head where you can quickly level off your head. That means you have to do it by the sticks. You know, you've got these locking mechanisms on the leg, and it can be a bit fiddly, especially if you're doing something quick. So that leads us to the video head itself. Now, this is a new video head. I only had it out for 2 little shoots, so I need to try it out a lot more before I give my full opinion on it. But the locks itself, quite easy to use, but you can, this is fully locked now, you know, and I can push through it. So it's not the strongest, and then once it's twisted, it's quite hard to undo. You can add some drag into it, which I like, but look at the size of it, and it weighs nothing. And I love this sort of cast iron effect that Gitzo do. You know, they specialize in wildlife stuff, so it is silent, it's smooth, and you don't get that reflection like you do off other, you know, magnesium tripods. I did have a time when I was filming a short-eared owl in the Isle of Wight, and I was panning across, and obviously, you know, they do these dives down, and a few times I anticipated it was going to dive, so I stopped, and it's sort of the tripod head jolts down like that and ruins the shot. Now, that's probably more down to me than the tripod head, but I noticed it pans a lot better than the tilting action itself. At one point, I didn't even take my rucksack. I literally took this out, especially when I was walking the dog in the New Forest. You know, I just had this system over the shoulder. It was like I had nothing there. It was so light, it was so nice, it was a breeze walking. Normally I'm lugging a huge, you know, 70-litre minimum backpack at least. Carrying this around was a real joy to use, and it means you're getting shots that you probably wouldn't get because you're nimble, you're fast, you know, you're quieter in the bushes. Horses for courses, you know, there are different setups and different ways of going for different subjects that you're filming. You know, sometimes you need to be lightweight and compact. This is a great option. Sometimes you need to be, you know, have the best quality, the longest reach, you know, in a photo hide, then you go for the bigger tripod, you know, the hide, and your kit gets bigger. Now the 70-200 GM Mark II is my favorite lens. I love doing sort of travel photography with it and filming. You know, I'm so used to filming with telephoto lenses that sometimes I struggle with its wide lens. And this lens is, if you haven't used it, it's fantastic. It's the fastest lens I've ever used. It's so light, you know, it's whisper quiet. It's got all the buttons, the mod cons, the new focus linear motors that Sony has got. I absolutely love that lens, especially for like travel photography and filming. It works really well, and I just want more chances to use that lens. And I thought about buying an APS-C lens to give me this similar reach, and I thought, well, I've got the 70-200. That's a great lens, you know, and I never tried putting a 2x converter on a lens, but I thought, well, it's an f2.8, it's already lightning quick at autofocus, maybe this could work. With the short ear owl that was in the Isle of Wight, I did lose focus a few times. I didn't latch on. The bird IAF didn't work, and I was using the 120 frames crop as well because it was quite far out, and these owls are so erratic with their flying. I wanted to slow it right down to see if I could get that dive movement that they do. So I was filming at 120 frames, and it did lose focus a lot of the times. But I also think that's got something to do with obviously it being quite low. So all the bushes and everything else in the background is probably distracting this lens or the autofocus system. I don't want to say it was the 2x converter yet because I didn't try it out enough. But I did notice it lost focus quite a lot. It wasn't sticky, you know, like locked on and that was it. But, you know, there were so many ifs and buts that it could have been that I don't want to blame that on the teleconverter. Now, obviously it's a 2.8 to start with. You are going to add 2 stops onto that f-stop, so you are working with a 5.6. Now it's a really nice, a 5.6 600 telephoto zoom lens. I'll take that. You know, that's what I want in a super telephoto zoom lens. I want that fixed aperture, but unfortunately Sony doesn't provide that one for full frame yet. But this way, you know, I have a very versatile option because I can take the 2x converter off, I can add the 1.4x if something's closer, or I can take it off completely if I need it more low light. It's not stuck in one thing. It's not stuck at a 5.6 600mm. Can be anything from a 70 to a 600, from a 2.8 to a 5.6. Depending on the setup and what I need, I can make this work without, you know, carrying an extra lens. I can see for, like, you know, if you were filming on a boat or, you know, something small, you could probably even tuck it in without a tripod or a nice monopod. I bet on a boat, you know, choppy seas, you're filming some dolphins or something like that, little monopod in this setup, I bet that would work really well. And I can still put it in 120, and what I'm getting another 1.5, so I'm getting like an 800mm 5.6 lens. You know, that's ridiculous, you know, and this lens is pin sharp, beautiful quality. I obviously do think it will take a hit on the autofocus, maybe not as much as that initial test, but it obviously will have an effect on it. But I think that's a great little option, a nice little, you know, pocket rocket, and it's versatile. I can take this in my bag and I can film travel stuff, and then I can put a 2x converter on it and I can film dolphins from a boat. You know, there are lots of options for me with this setup. Now, I feel like this gave me a plenty enough reach. A lot of the stuff I was filming was the owl, you know, they've got huge wingspans, they're very large, and you don't want to be too tight because, again, they're erratic, and you want that dive, and you want to be quite wide where you're shooting. And the other things I was filming were deer and the wild horses in New Forest. So, you know, I'm not needing that really long lens like an 800mm for like filming, you know, songbirds. They're the ones, you know, the little robins, your small wrens and things like that. That's when you really need like an 800, 600, 800mm lens. For bigger mammals and stuff like that, this range perfect, especially with that extra 120 crop, came in really handy with the owls. I had a guy next to me, he was doing photography, you know, he had the classic Canon huge prime lens, and he wasn't getting the reach that this little bad boy was getting in video. So, you know, that is the power of the APS-C Super 35 sensor, and now I think Super 35 is the way for me to go. Now, the other really nice thing about this lens is its close focus ability. You know, you can focus quite close to objects, so it gives you not a one-to-one macro, but it does give you some nice workarounds for using macro with this lens. Now, I also picked up this Nisi close focusing adapter. So basically it's a filter that goes on the end of your lens, basically like a magnifying glass. So instead of taking a macro lens, another lens to film other wildlife, I've just been taking this. Now, I didn't have any opportunity to use it yet on my trip, but I thought I'd just bring it up about having a complete, it's not just about having one setup. I want this to do everything, you know. I want it to do every job. That's why I can take it apart and I can do low light filming and travel stuff. I can add this on and I can do macro stuff. You know, I want it to be as versatile as possible. I want it to do as many jobs as possible. So, you know, this is the Nisi close-up lens, 77mm, the Mark II edition. Now, let's talk about the camera and the elephant in the room. And yeah, it's the EVF. I love having, the amount of times I went, oh, I can't see through it. And there was one point in the Isle of Wight before the owls, it was a very sunny day. I had sun in the back of me. I couldn't see a thing. Literally, I couldn't see a thing. Couldn't even see my settings. I had my sunglasses on. All I could see is a reflection of my ugly mug in the back of the monitor screen. It was a nightmare. So the only option is I have to bring an EVF. So I can't make this light and compact anymore because I'm going to have to add a cage and I'm going to have to add an EVF because, you know, if you're in a hide, fine, but it's just not good. You can't judge your focus. That whole owl stuff that I was filming had the, you know, one of my favourite animals is a short-eared owl. I was so excited to see it. I thought, oh, brilliant, tracking it across, blah, blah, thinking there. Got back to the van, played it. Even in the back of the screen, you're like, oh, it looks fine. Put it into the computer. Oh, bloody hell. It's all out of focus. You know, that's the problem. If I had an EVF, I would have noticed 2 seconds into that shot and I would have adjusted. I would have gone into, you know, manual focus override and focused it manually. I'm thinking of workarounds, but the only workaround is that I take that EVF. So apart from that, you know, I think this is a fantastic option. I do want to try it out some more, especially that ×2 converter, see if the autofocus is working correctly. You know, I really hope that they keep bringing out models. I would love to see an FX6 with a Super 35 sensor and have that electronic ND, some high frame rate options, good dynamic range, where I'm happy to sacrifice image body stabilization because I'm working on a tripod anyway, and I'd much rather have internal NDs. Much more useful for me when I've got huge prime lenses or whatever where I have to carry a matte box. And I would like that Super 35 reach. I find it so crisp, especially if it's downsampled like this is. An FX6 downsampled from 8K maybe, give me 120 frames 4K, give me 240 frames 4K maybe, or at least 2K, happy with that. But yeah, I really enjoyed using this. A nice little travel option when visiting family. Didn't have to take a big backpack, had all I needed in one small backpack. But yeah, I'm going to be trying out the EVF on the next video, so stay tuned for that one with the FX-30. But in the meantime, peace, happy new year, and yeah, see you on the next one.